Alice couldn't remember a time when the world wasn't tinted with the threat of war. But there was a before, faint memories of spring mornings in the old orchard behind her house, picking wild violets with Emil while her mother hung out clean sheets that fluttered in the soft wind. She remembered laughter, the sound of bread baking, the way her father would scoop her up in his strong arms at sunset, promising stories of faraway places. Yet lately, all that warmth was veiled in a cold mist of fear and uncertainty, and the world she knew shrank every day. The morning the sirens first wailed through her village, Alice was sitting at the kitchen table, dipping cotton into a chipped enamel basin, helping her mother roll bandages. "We must all do what we can," her mother had told her, eyes darting to the window as if expecting soldiers even in the quiet of dawn. "Everyone needs help these days." Alice tried to be brave. She wanted so badly to make her mother proud, to show she was grown enough for whatever strange tasks wartime required. When the siren came, it started distant and soft, almost like some wounded animal howling in the fields. Then it swelled, louder, wilder, until every dog in the village began barking, and all the birds burst from the trees. Her mother's face drained of color. With movements both quick and gentle, she seized Alice's shoulders. "To the cellar, Alice! Quickly! Take Emil now!" Her voice was neither angry nor panicked, but the kind of calm that only comes from true fear. Alice grabbed Emil's hand. He was only 5, half awake and already crying, and half pulled, half carried him down the steep, narrow steps at the back of the house. The cellar wasn't meant for people. It always smelled of dirt and potatoes and the sharp, bitter tang of coal. It was small and cramped, with only an old blanket and the battered wooden crate where their father used to store apples. The sound above changed. There were shouts on the street now, then the dull thud of distant artillery, the first time Alice had felt explosions through the ground rather than just hearing about them from frightened adults over weak tea. Her mother pulled the heavy trapdoor closed, plunging them into darkness. Emil whimpered, frozen. Alice pressed her doll to her chest with one arm, held her brother with the other, and closed her eyes. She tried to pray, not the way adults did, with words whispered softly at night, but with raw, panic thoughts. "Please, please, let us be safe. Let Father come home. Let the roof stay above us." Each explosion rattled their world a little more. Plaster rained down. The thin cellar walls groaned. Dust coated her tongue and eyes. Whenever Emil began to wail, their mother pressed her hand over his mouth, whispering, "SSSHH, soldier SSSHH." Time lost all meaning. The darkness filled with strange images. Will we have a house tomorrow? Is our school even still standing? What do bodies look like after bombs? The siren cut off, leaving a ringing silence that seemed even more terrifying. At last, their mother shifted to open the trapdoor. Alice didn't want to leave. She almost preferred the small, safe darkness. But her mother was rising, and Alice gathered Emil in trembling arms and climbed into a world changed. Outside was chaos. Across the road, Alice saw flames devouring the old baker's house. She watched black smoke curling against the clouds, the smell hitting her with a wave of heat and burning hair. Their streets, once a pattern of tidy gardens and neighbors' voices, now lay in ruin. Windows gaped like broken jaws. Crows had gathered on the wires, louder than ever. A bicycle twisted in the gutter, tiny shoes abandoned beside it. People wandered through the debris. Alice caught sight of Mrs. Novak, who used to give out sweets on Sundays, sitting on her doorstep, clutching a stained rag, silent and staring at nothing. Somewhere, a baby cried, the sound high and sharp, making Alice's teeth ache with helplessness. The school, her school, was transformed, its big window blown out, paint streaked with soot, someone's book scattered in the mud. The teacher's desk, the place where Alice had dreamed of learning to be a doctor, was smashed and half buried under roof beams. Alice saw death for the first time that day, not in the stories, not in whispers, but in the broken shapes lying in the road. She couldn't remember the faces, only the way the world seemed both too loud and utterly silent. Soldiers appeared soon after, strange men with hard voices and dark eyes, not the gentle faces of the boys from their own village. They moved through like shadows, barking orders in a language Alice barely understood. Her mother huddled Alice and Emil close, lowering her gaze, praying not to be noticed. One soldier, young, haunted, with a red bandage across his brow, paused long enough to look at Alice. She did not look away. He gave a slow, deliberate nod just once. Alice never decided if he saw her as a child or simply another piece of wreckage to be spared. That night, they had no bread. Her mother quietly split a potato in 3. By candlelight, Alice watched her hands shake as she ate, and in that flickering glow, the world was half shadow, half reminder of everything lost. Emile fell asleep quickly, as children sometimes do when grief is too big to carry. Their mother sat against the kitchen wall, weeping in silence. Alice sat awake beside the window until well past midnight, staring past the broken glass at the cold sky above. If there was hope, it lay somewhere far away from the ruins. If there was a future, it was a mystery she would have to find herself. Somewhere in the darkness, Alice made a promise, not only to survive, but to help Emile, to protect her mother, and above all to remember that even children in war can be brave. She slept with the sirens written behind her eyes, knowing there would be more days just like this, and her childhood was already burning away. Before dawn, Alice woke shivering in her thin bed, every sound outside raw and sharp, her mind full of the night's horrors. She lay for a moment, eyes open, listening to the shaky breath of her brother and the creak of the ruined beams above. The old house somehow still stood, but it was changed. Every wall cold, every window showing only the burnt skeletons of neighbors' homes. Her mother was already up, boiling the last of their tea by the kitchen fire, face drawn and distant. "We must collect water," she said softly, tying a scarf around her hair with trembling hands. "The well behind the church is still there, they say." Alice nodded, willing herself to be strong. Since yesterday, something new had grown inside her, an awareness that nothing would ever be the same, and that survival depended on courage she'd never known she had. She wrapped Emile in his thickest coat, holding onto his tiny fingers. They left the house together, slowly picking their way through streets littered with debris and twisted metal. The school bell hung bent from its tower, the playground empty except for one broken doll with its porcelain face cracked in half. Alice felt a pang of longing for days when her worst worry had been homework. At the church, dozens of villagers had gathered at the well, forming nervous lines. Some whispered prayers. Others simply watched the sky, waiting for the next attack. Alice's mother gave her a battered tin cup, the same one her father had used before the war, and told her to fetch water for them all. The pump's handle was stiff with ice and red rust, but Alice turned it again and again until, finally, water trickled into her cup. She filled it 3 times, careful not to spill a single drop, and handed each carefully filled cup to her mother. People spoke in low voices about the soldiers, how they'd taken food from every house, how one neighbor had simply vanished in the night, how there was talk of evacuations to the east. Alice gripped Emile's hand harder. "Will we leave, too, Mama?" she whispered, only for her mother to hush her quickly and glance around. That afternoon, Alice wandered with Emile through what remained of their street. She saw scavenger kids, older boys picking through wreckage, searching for anything they could eat or fix, or use for barter. There was an unspoken rule now. Protect what was yours. Speak little, move quickly. When 2 boys looked at Alice's shoes, too small, but less worn than most, she felt herself shrink, clutching Emile tighter, heart pounding in her chest. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a sound stranger than bombs. A shrill, pain-filled cry. Alice followed the noise, stepping over splintered wood, until she found a cat wedged beneath a fallen beam. Its fur was streaked black with soot and blood. Alice's mother would have turned away, another mouth to feed, another reminder of helplessness. But Alice, thinking of how it must feel to be left buried and alone, reached under and pulled the cat free. It hissed and clawed her arm, but she held firm, wrapping it in her coat and whispering wordless comfort. She brought the cat home, ignoring the tired, worried look from her mother. "This is not the time," her mother whispered, but did not turn her away. That night, as Emile and the cat both nestled beside her, Alice felt a little bit of warmth bloom in the ruined world. Before sleep, she heard more news. Soldiers had returned to the church, searching for men and boys to recruit or arrest. Soon, everyone would have to leave. The village was marked for evacuation, they said. War was moving closer. Their home, battered as it was would soon be nothing but memory. Alice tried to savor everything about that small, broken room. The shape of Mother's shadow against the candlelight, Emil's soft breathing, the purring of the rescued cat. She understood, with a certainty both bitter and brave, that tomorrow she would need even more courage. The war was everywhere, but hope, strange and quiet, still lived in small acts. A cup of water, a quiet hand, a life saved from the rubble. That evening, a bitter wind swept through the ruined village, rattling loose shutters and howling across empty streets. The townspeople whispered that the front was moving closer. Soldiers had warned them to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. Alice watched her mother pack what little they had, blankets, 2 loaves of bread, a pouch of dried beans, into a worn satchel. "We cannot take much," her mother said softly, her voice breaking. "Only what we need to live." Alice helped Emil pull on 3 sweaters, though none matched, and tied the rescued cat into the crook of her own jacket. She thought of leaving her doll behind, her last comfort from before the war, but at the last moment, she tucked it into the satchel too. Everyone was tense, eyes dark with fear. Even Emil seemed older, his small face set and quiet. Night fell heavy. The cat shivered against Alice's chest. Emil whimpered but did not cry. Outside, headlights swept the street. Soldiers shouted and moved door to door, their guns slung carelessly but their voices sharp. "Out! All who can walk, now! The road to the east is open, but not for long. Go, or be left behind." Alice's heart drummed like thunder. Her mother gripped her hand until her knuckles turned white. Leaving home felt like tearing out a part of herself, but there was no choice. Not with boots in the hallway, not with death at their backs. They joined a long, stumbling column of villagers on the icy road. Some pushed carts, others carried children or elderly relatives on their backs. In the distance, flashes lit the sky. Artillery, Alice guessed, or maybe houses burning in the next town. She didn't look back, but beneath her breath, she softly counted her steps, anything to distract herself from the gnawing dread. The procession moved slowly, the only sounds their tired feet and the hollow moaning of the wind. Once, a panicked horse crashed through the column, sending people scattering. Somewhere, behind them, a woman wailed for a lost child. Time meant nothing. The night stretched on until only exhaustion kept them moving. As the moon crept behind the clouds, the road emerged into a patch of woodland. Here, the troop leader announced they would stop, just a few hours to rest, as daylight brings danger. Alice and her family curled up beneath the trees, huddling for warmth, sharing bread in the dark. She felt the cold sink into her bones, but she dared not sleep. In the shadows, other families whispered, prayed, or sobbed. The rescued cat pressed its nose into her elbow, purring with faint trust. Suddenly, gunshots cracked in the distance, far enough to be safe, close enough to keep everyone awake. A boy near Alice clung to his father, trembling. Alice swallowed the taste of fear and tried not to imagine the worst. Somewhere in those long hours, Alice realized she could depend on only her own strength. The old world was gone, safety and childhood gone too. Yet, in the dark, surrounded by strangers and sorrow, she held on to her mother, Emil, and even the cat, promising herself that she would fight for them, whatever came. Morning would bring questions. Where would they go? What losses would they endure? Who might not survive the next leg of their journey? But for now, all Alice could do was cling to those she had, her eyes open to both the cruelty and the small kindnesses in a world undone by war. Dawn crept over the woods in a pale, uncertain shroud. Thin light revealed the faces of the refugees, men and women hollow-eyed, children wrapped in blankets that did little against the biting cold, all shivering and silent after the terrors of the night. Alice sat between her mother and Emil, numb with sleeplessness, the rescued cat an anchor of warmth in her lap. Soldiers barked orders before sunrise. The roads ahead are full of hazards. Bandits. Bombs. We march fast and stay close. There was no room for comfort or hope, only the pressure to move, to survive. Alice's legs ached as she rose. Hunger gnawed beneath her ribs, but she kept her mouth shut. One glance at her mother's raw, red hands and Emil's pale lips was reminder enough that her pain was nothing special here. They entered a landscape familiar and foreign. Broken farms, smoldering barns, fields flattened by tanks. Old neighbors, Faces Alice had known all her life, marched with heads lowered, eyes wide, too tired even for tears. The column steps grew heavy with fear and loss. Mid-morning, shouting ahead halted the crowd. A tangle of barbed wire blocked the road. Beyond it, the border, a land promised to be safer, lay just out of reach. Armed men, not soldiers Alice recognized, stood beside a burned-out truck, faces masked in dirty scarves. For a moment, everyone froze, uncertain if these were friends, enemies, or something in between. One of the armed men demanded payment, money, jewelry, anything of value, for the passage of each family. Terrified, the villagers fumbled through pockets and satchels, offering watches, rings, bread, old coins. Alice's mother pressed her wedding band, hands shaking, into the man's fist. Still, he demanded more. Alice tried to hide her doll, but a rough hand seized it, yanking it away. Tears stung her eyes. The world spun with injustice, but she bit her lip until it bled. Some families lost everything. Others begged until the guards relented. When it was finally their turn to cross, Alice held Emil's hand so tight he whimpered. Beyond the wire, a new world waited, unwelcoming, scarred by old trenches and shell craters, but free of the familiar threats behind. The column walked for hours, crossing no man's land where no trees grew and the earth was torn by old wars. They passed a village burnt to its bones. Here, the smell of death was thick and inescapable. Alice saw things she could never again forget. A cart abandoned beside a shallow grave, a stray dog limping on 3 legs, and beneath a shattered sign, a pair of boots sticking from the rubble, once a person, now only memory. By dusk, they reached a camp of ragged tents by a muddy stream. Aid workers greeted them, offering soup and rough bread. Alice was too hungry for pride, then too exhausted to taste what she ate. Emil, silent as a shadow, pressed himself to her side. Their mother stitched at her sleeve with shaking hands, eyes always on the horizon, always scanning for a threat. Night in the camp felt different. There was still fear, but also a flicker of relief. For the first time in days, there were no explosions, no dogs barking warnings, no foreign boots on ruined steps. Alice fell asleep clutching Emil and the cat, haunted by what she had lost, but also by the faint, stubborn possibility that not everything was lost after all. Tomorrow, new choices and dangers would come. But that night, as wind rattled the canvas above, Alice dreamed of her village, now distant. She understood, with a wisdom far beyond her years, that to survive, she would have to become more than a frightened girl. She would have to become brave, clever, and most of all unbreakable. Days in the camp blurred together. Mud, cold, endless lines for bread and soup, and the low murmur of worry that clung to every waking hour. Alice learned quickly to keep her shoes tied tight, to stand close to her family in crowds, to guard every scrap of food with a suspicious instinct new to her gentle heart. Aid workers came and went, speaking in unfamiliar languages, their faces kind but distant. Sometimes they brought medicine, more often just hope. The war will turn, they promised. Soon you can go home. But even at 9, Alice understood there was no going back, not to the orchard, not to her school, not to the world before the bombs. Night was worst. The cat, nestled beneath her coat, twitched in its sleep, as if still running from sirens. Emil cried against her shoulder, asking for their father or stories of happier days. Alice tried to stay strong, but sometimes tears escaped, silent in the dark, as she listened to the sobs and coughs of families on every side. It wasn't just hunger or cold that gnawed at her. It was the loss of safety, the way suspicion had crept in among the children. Alice watched as boys fought over crusts of bread, as older girls hoarded secret tins, as parents grew sharp and desperate. She knew she must be careful. Kindness was precious, but every act of trust now held risk. One day, rumors swept through the tents, an outbreak of illness at the far end of the camp. People shivered, remembering how quickly fever claimed its victims, how the smallest cough could spell devastation. Aid workers urged everyone to boil their water. Alice and her mother filled pots at the muddy stream, hoping it would be enough. That same evening, as dusk turned the sky to a dull silver, a woman staggered into camp alone. Her clothes were torn, her arms bruised. She begged for her child, lost somewhere on the road, but no one could help her. Alice's mother pressed a piece of bread into her hand and wrapped her in a coat, whispering comfort through tears. Watching this, Alice felt something inside her harden and awaken at the same time. She did not have much, no money, no father, almost nothing left from before. But she had hands, a voice, and an understanding that even the small could protect and comfort the lost. That night, she promised her mother she would help however she could, find children in the dark, share bread when possible, watch for sickness, and warn others. Her mother kissed her forehead, pride and worry welling in her eyes. "You are brave, Alice. I wish you never had to be brave, but I am so grateful you are." Later, as the wind rattled the canvas and the lights of the aid post flickered in the gloom, Alice huddled with Emile and the cat. She understood that she could not end the war or change what had been lost. But she could make sure, even here, that hope did not die. For the first time, she saw a future, a life after the war, perhaps, where she was not merely a victim, but a survivor and helper for others. And as the stars blinked through the holes in the canvas, the smallest flicker of hope took root again in her chest, resisting the darkness. The camp had become both prison and refuge, a place where Alice was safe from gunfire, yet never far from hunger or fear. Spring arrived late, bringing cold rains that turned the earth to mud and sent illness swirling through the tents like a ghost. Each day brought news: more refugees, fewer supplies, rumors that the war's end might come before the bread ran out, but never certainty. Alice and her mother spent hours helping others. They distributed bread slices to weak children, watched for signs of fever, and led frightened newcomers to the water station. Sometimes Alice joined other children for lessons beneath the largest tent, where an old schoolteacher wrote the alphabet in the dirt. Alice struggled to remember poems she'd loved before the war, but teaching Emile to draw letters by lantern light helped ground her when the world felt too dark. But the dangers of life in camp were not only from hunger and cold. One evening, Alice saw a group of older boys pushing a smaller child to the ground, stealing his bread ration. On instinct, she ran over, heart thumping, and planted herself between them. "Leave him alone!" she snapped, surprised by her own boldness. The boys wavered, then wandered away, muttering. Alice helped the crying child up, shared a piece of her crust, and told him his name, Alice. "I won't let them hurt you." That small act made Alice both friends and enemies. Some kids joined her in watching over the youngest. Others resented her for drawing attention from the older, more desperate children. Sometimes, at night, she lay awake, worried what anger and desperation might make people do. Her mother squeezed her hand. "Kindness is never weakness, Alice, but you must always be careful." One day, an aid worker announced there would be a list. Children chosen for safe passage to another country, one not torn by war, where families might be taken in by strangers who offered hope of school and safety. The camp buzzed with rumors. Mothers wept. Could they trust their children to strangers, knowing it might be their only chance? Alice watched as children's names were called, some leaving with only what they wore and a slip of paper sewn into a coat pocket. A new beginning, carrying the price of separation and uncertainty. Alice wasn't chosen. That night, she hugged Emile tight and brushed her mother's hair back from her temples, whispering dreams of orchards and wild violets and a country that had not yet drowned in sorrow. She knew that hope required sacrifice, that every day she survived was another act of courage, big or small. Tomorrow, there would be more danger, more acts of bravery, and more wounds that might never heal. But as rain pattered gently on the tent, Alice didn't let go of Emile or her hope, a hope that, against all odds, a new life might be waiting beyond the mud and misery, if only she could hold her family, her courage, and her small flame of kindness together. The days grew warmer, but the fears only shifted shape. Soldiers had appeared once more near the refugee camp, this time with unfamiliar insignia and strange, guttural accents. People whispered that nearby villages were being emptied again, that fighting had restarted somewhere to the north. Each new arrival brought stories of destruction, warnings about spies, and pleas for help. Alice had learned to watch the adults' faces for clues, her mother's set jaw, the way aid workers moved hurriedly on tense mornings. She kept Emile close and the cat safer still. At night, wind rattled the canvas and gunfire echoed faintly from beyond the hills, reminding everyone that peace was not theirs yet. One morning, Soldiers came with lists and hard voices. "Prepare to move," they barked, barely looking at the tired families. This new march would be different. Not east, but south, they said, to a safer camp or, some whispered, a train that would take the lucky ones to a city away from the front. Alice wasn't sure whether to hope. Packing was quick and ruthless. The family's few belongings fit in the same battered satchel. The rescued cat now rode in Emil's arms, more beloved than any toy. The column moved through the wooded path. Alice forced herself to memorize every step, every patch of wildflowers, afraid she might never see them again. They walked for hours through ruined villages and fields blackened by fire. Once, as they passed a farmhouse, Alice saw a line of bodies covered in rough canvas, lined up along the road. Around them, silent adults avoided looking, but the children could not look away. Emil wept into Alice's sleeve. The image burned itself into her memory, proof that war left no one untouched. By the end of that endless march, the travelers reached a waiting train, graffiti-scarred, windows cracked, metal cold as a grave. Soldiers herded everyone aboard, pressing them close together in the rattling cars. The journey was hungry, cold, and silent, broken only by the sobs and whispers of children and the cat's purr, a fragile comfort in the sea of fear. Night fell as the train stopped near a distant city. When the doors finally opened, aid workers greeted them with thin blankets and broth, guiding the families to a new camp. Alice felt both relief and sorrow. Survival was a victory, but part of her wondered if she was losing pieces of herself with each move. Home, safety, even memories. Still, as they settled in their new tent, Alice promised Emil she would keep him safe. "No matter where we go," she said fiercely, "I will find a way." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that the worst things could not take everything. Through every trial, her courage had grown, not the loud bravery of heroes and stories, but the quiet kind, steady and fierce, that survived even the darkest nights. As she drifted into sleep, the sounds of war farther behind them now, Alice dreamed not of the world she had lost, but of the home she and her family might one day build. A place where hope would grow again, fed by courage, kindness, and memory. The new camp rested on the edge of a sprawling, battered city, one that had survived bombings and sieges, yet still pulsed with stubborn life. Here, tents gave way to barracks of rough wood. The air was warmer, tinged with chimney smoke and the cries of street vendors beyond the fence. Everything was unfamiliar, yet for the first time in months, Alice felt the faintest promise of beginning instead of loss. Alice awoke to new routines, lining up for bowls of porridge, standing in line for well water, and listening to aid workers announce news by megaphone. She watched other children, older and younger, gather for lessons in a ruined schoolhouse. School! Could she return to it after all this suffering? Her mother encouraged her with a smile that hid every shadow. "You are clever, Alice. Take every lesson you can find." Yet trauma clung to all the refugees in quiet ways. Emil struggled with nightmares and barely spoke. Their mother spent long hours mending what could be mended, but sadness lined her every movement. Alice, for her part, carried the images of the war with her, the bodies in the field, the villages turned to ash, but forced herself to move forward, step by step. And then, one afternoon, the camp leaders gathered everyone in the square. A group of city women had come to offer help. They brought books, notebooks, clean clothes, and invitations for children to attend the local school. Alice's heart pounded. She joined the line, her shoes muddy, her hair tangled, but her chin high and eyes bright. The classroom at first felt strange and quiet. The teacher spoke kindly, and the other children stared, some with curiosity, some with hostile suspicion. On her first day, Alice stumbled over new words and unfamiliar lessons. Still, she felt herself changing. The ache of loss was not erased, but each day she found new courage, facing the world with the memory of what she had already endured. Weeks passed, and as spring approached in the city, Alice found a fragile sense of home. Emil began to play with other children. Their mother found work mending clothes for city dwellers, always returning by sunset with a little money and sometimes a smile. The rescued cat grew plump and affectionate, becoming a small legend among the children. Alice realized that even in this wounded, weary place, life could grow again. She greeted new arrivals from even farther away, helped search for missing family, and comforted children with stories of the orchard and wildflowers. She never forgot the old wounds, but no longer felt crushed by them. Yet one morning, while standing at the edge of the yard, she watched pale sunlight spill across the world and understood something new. She was changed forever, but not destroyed. The war had taken her home, scattered her family, and forced her to see horrors no child should ever see. Still, from the ashes, courage and kindness had taken root, fierce and resilient as flowers growing in the cracks. As church bells rang faintly from across the ruined city, Alice clasped Emil's hand and looked toward the future. No matter what might come, she knew this. She was no longer just a frightened child. She was a survivor, brave because she had to be, gentle because she still chose to be, and alive against all odds. And even in a broken world, that was enough to call a new day hope.